Meghan Markle did take the dress. She's admitted it in another PR catastrophe for the Duchess of Delusion. Meghan Markle's fashion feud has now been revealed.
Dior doesn't just block people for fun. This is a legendary fashion house that has dressed princesses, first ladies, and some of the biggest stars in Hollywood. When a brand with that kind of history suddenly shuts the door on someone, it usually means something serious is going on. But Meghan Markle reportedly reacted like the move made no sense at all, almost as if she expected every designer in Paris to welcome her instantly. In her world, every stylist should be chasing her down. Every luxury label should clear their schedules, and every couture house should treat her like she's already the next fashion icon. That was the image being pushed, loud and clear. The reality inside the fashion industry works very differently. This world doesn't run on expectations or titles.
She has now been caught on camera wearing a $1,695 designer dress that she was once accused of stealing after a photo shoot, and it comes as top designers.
It runs on reputation, credibility, and trust. And when it came to Meghan's reputation, insiders say Dior looked closely and simply decided, nope, not happening. In high fashion, status isn't something you declare online. It's something you build slowly through professionalism, reliability, and respect.
And it has led back to explosive allegations that she has sticky fingers with the pricey frock after wearing it in a high-profile 2022 photo shoot.
Across the industry. While Meghan was building a global humanitarian image in public, the fashion world was quietly paying attention to other stories circulating behind the scenes. Stylists were reportedly scrambling over missing gowns. There was talk about borrowed dresses that never seemed to return on schedule. Designers were frustrated, some feeling burned by past experiences, and a few simply refused to work with her again. None of this was loud public drama, but the whispers were spreading fast. Meanwhile, Meghan's side often framed the situation differently. She appeared to position herself as the misunderstood star, hinting that jealous insiders or a biased system were standing in her way. But critics quickly pushed back on that idea. After all, Dior has dressed actual queens, princesses, and screen legends. The idea that the house suddenly decided to target one person for no reason sounded hard to believe. Something clearly happened behind the scenes. Something complicated enough that Dior reportedly made a very firm decision. According to insiders, the brand quietly chose a simple policy regarding Meghan. No collaborations, no loans, no future projects. Just a complete stop. The first hint didn't come from headlines or dramatic statements. It came from silence. Meghan's PR team was reportedly trying hard to connect with the brand, hoping for a couture loan, a custom gown, anything that could link her name to Dior's legacy. Normally, fashion houses respond quickly, even if the answer is no, because maintaining professional relationships is everything in this industry. But in this case, nothing came back. Emails sat unanswered. Phone calls went nowhere. Then an internal message reportedly began circulating among fashion representatives, the kind of message that publicists hate hearing. It was short and direct. We do not lend, collaborate, or communicate regarding this talent. And there was no public explanation and no room for negotiation. Just a quiet but very firm freeze out. And in the fashion world, that kind of move is huge. Dior is known for handling powerful personalities. The brand has navigated decades of celebrity egos, high-profile demands, and dramatic moments.
None of the items are being hawked on websites. None of the items are being given for free. The royal family pay for their clothes from trusted designers, and by the way, tend to wear them over and over again. Beloved piece.
From Marilyn Monroe to Princess Diana to Jennifer Lawrence, Dior has worked with women who carried enormous global attention. Yet Meghan, who many expected to become a modern royal fashion figure, reportedly didn't even receive a polite rejection. The door was simply closed behind the scenes. Inside Paris fashion circles, insiders weren't confused by the situation. Many saw it coming. One source explained the logic very clearly. Dior protects the brand, not the celebrity. According to that view, if someone brings potential risk, ongoing drama, wardrobe issues, or negative press, the brand walks away quickly. Reputation is everything in luxury. Fashion, and Dior guards that reputation carefully. So when the brand looked at Meghan's situation, insiders say they didn't see a major opportunity. Instead, they saw a pattern developing, and that was enough for them to step back completely. And if Dior's silence was the first signal, the deeper reason behind the reported block was even more explosive. It all traces back to a rumor that was never meant to leave private conversations.
So this is because staffers on the shoot believed the former starlet allegedly walked off with several items that day without permission, including the dress she is now proudly wearing 3 years.
Once that rumor started circulating through the industry, things escalated fast. Negotiations stopped, interest disappeared, and the mood inside fashion circles changed overnight. By the time the story reached Paris, whispers were already moving through the industry. Not loud gossip, not tabloid drama, just quiet conversations between stylists, editors, and wardrobe directors comparing notes behind closed doors. And strangely, many of those stories followed the same pattern. The situation often began with Meghan borrowing a designer piece for a photo shoot or a high-profile event. But according to the rumors floating around, the item sometimes didn't make its way back to the fashion house when expected. At first, most people assumed the returns were simply delayed. That happens in fashion all the time. But as deadlines passed and pieces still hadn't shown up, some insiders began to ask questions. And that's when the whispers really started to grow. Reminders started going out, polite at first, then more direct, but according to insiders, those reminders were ignored. Eventually, the original lender was told something shocking, that the piece was being kept. In the fashion world, that kind of response raises eyebrows immediately. Wardrobe professionals usually don't.
There have now been multiple reports about Meghan taking this high-priced designer clothing, maybe with permission, but certainly not paying for it. Multiple reports, and she's doubled down with this threat against the New York Post, which actually I think confirms the story, because she's admitting she did take the dress.
Panic over a single missing outfit. Clothes get misplaced in this industry all the time. Shoots move fast, events are chaotic, and sometimes things simply take longer to return. But insiders say this situation wasn't about one dress. It was about how often these situations seem to pop up. Several magazine teams reportedly found themselves chasing down gowns or jewelry again and again. Stylists had to send repeated follow-ups just to track items.
Those clothes are being lent by top designers of the world, and I have since heard in a more recent photo shoot of Meghan's, there was also a lot of stuff that was not returned after Meghan wore it in a very high-profile photo shoot.
One stylist even vented privately that Meghan believed once something had been worn publicly, it became part of her image and should stay connected to her brand. Others tried to soften the story, saying misunderstandings happen in busy productions. But inside fashion houses, quiet conversations were getting louder, patterns were starting to appear, and designers were paying attention. Every time another awkward situation came up, more labels grew hesitant about lending pieces. Behind closed doors, the message slowly spread through stylist networks. If you absolutely need the item returned quickly, maybe don't send it to Meghan. No headlines, no public scandal.
He reported that Meghan, at the end of that shoot, the crew that was there was sort of surprised because she had some high-heeled shoes on that no longer seemed to be in the room for the shoot.
Just a quiet shift in trust that people inside the industry couldn't ignore. The public never really saw these stories, but reputation inside fashion travels silently and extremely fast. Still, insiders say none of those earlier incidents were the real breaking point. That moment reportedly came later, tied to one very specific dress that resurfaced years afterward. The now infamous.
She thought it was mad that she couldn't take all of these clothes. So it's like, don't now, when you can do whatever you want, try and say that this is anything to do with what the British royal family do, because you never liked it. You never liked the fact that you couldn't take all of these free clothing. It had to be paid for. And of course it was paid for from the royal fund.
Emerald green gown. Meghan wore the dress during a high-profile Variety magazine photo shoot. The look was dramatic, elegant, and unforgettable. But the gown wasn't a gift and it wasn't purchased. It had been loaned strictly for the shoot with a clear agreement that it would be returned right afterward. That's standard practice in fashion editorials. Once filming wrapped, though, the gown reportedly vanished from the expected return process. Stylists waited. Designers stayed patient. Emails were sent politely asking about the return timeline. As weeks passed, the messages became gentle reminders. Eventually, some insiders say the request simply stopped to avoid creating tension. The dress quietly joined what some insiders described as a growing list of unanswered wardrobe questions. Then years later, something surprising happened. Meghan appeared at a private event wearing that exact same emerald gown again. Not a replica, not a similar design. According to people who recognized it instantly, it looked like the original piece. Photos began circulating quickly through stylist group chats. Screenshots from the old Variety wardrobe list were placed right next to the new event photos. Side by side, the match looked undeniable. That moment triggered a wave of reactions across the industry. Some stylists laughed in disbelief. Others were genuinely upset. The original designer, who had already avoided speaking publicly, reportedly felt embarrassed seeing the gown appear again as if it had always belonged to Meghan. Fashion houses don't mind lending their creations. That's a normal part of the industry, but they care deeply about respect for agreements and proper handling of their work. When those boundaries feel ignored, it creates serious tension. The emerald green gown quickly became what many insiders called the smoking gun. Not just another rumor or vague story, but a moment that seemed to confirm years of quiet whispers. Once screenshots and photos reached senior fashion executives, the reaction moved fast. The fallout spread through the industry like a domino effect no one could stop. Suddenly, the dress represented something bigger than a single wardrobe issue. It became a symbol of years of private concerns finally bubbling to the surface. Stylists, editors, and designers who had stayed quiet began sharing their experiences behind closed doors. And the conversation wasn't just about one missing gown anymore. It was about a pattern of behavior that luxury brands take very seriously. Paris insiders say fashion houses rarely react with public drama. Instead, they protect themselves quietly. If trust, reliability, or reputation starts to feel uncertain, decisions get made fast. According to those insiders, Meghan's situation had already raised enough red flags to make several brands nervous. Loan requests slowed down. Invitations to exclusive fittings quietly disappeared. Stylists and wardrobe directors started double-checking every arrangement before agreeing to work together. In this world, one mistake can echo globally within hours. Sources describe a tense mood behind the scenes. Designers and fashion representatives weren't necessarily angry. Many were simply frustrated and protective of their work. Creating couture pieces takes months of craftsmanship, and every item carries the reputation of the brand behind it. The fashion industry doesn't need loud headlines to notice problems. It only needs signs of unpredictability, missing pieces, or broken agreements. And according to insiders, that evidence had been stacking up quietly for years. Every whispered story, every delayed return, every awkward moment during a shoot slowly pointed toward the same conclusion. Working with Meghan might carry more risk than many houses were willing to accept. Fashion operates like a tightly connected network. Word moves quickly, even when nobody speaks publicly. One stylist's frustration becomes another stylist's warning. Editors share notes. Designers exchange quiet updates. By the time the emerald green gown reappeared, many insiders say the industry had already built a collective picture behind the scenes. That dress didn't create the reputation, it simply confirmed it. And once that confirmation spread through fashion circles, the situation escalated even further. After the emerald green dress situation started spreading through the fashion circles that truly matter, insiders say things changed quickly. Designers and wardrobe directors reportedly began tightening security around their loan systems. Agreements were checked twice, inventories were tracked more closely, and access to rare couture pieces became much more restricted. Every loaned outfit suddenly felt like a high-stakes gamble. In luxury fashion, trust is the line that separates a yes from a firm no, and according to insiders, Meghan had already crossed that line in the eyes of many brands. The ripple effect didn't stop with designers. Stylists and magazine editors reportedly started feeling nervous too. Featuring a celebrity in a major spread requires precise planning, expensive wardrobe loans, and strict timelines. If one gown disappears or gets delayed, the entire production can fall apart. Suddenly, the concern wasn't just about one dress, it was about logistics, deadlines, and the potential chaos that could follow. In the fashion industry, timing and trust are everything, and neither one can afford surprises. The situation reportedly escalated when different fashion houses began quietly comparing notes. Stylists mentioned delayed returns. Some talked about borrowed accessories that never made their way back. Others described garments returning late or arriving damaged after shoots. None of the insiders described it as malicious. malicious behavior. Instead, they framed it as careless handling that slowly strained professional relationships. But in a tightly connected industry, even small issues can grow into big warnings once people start talking. And once one major house raises concerns, others listen carefully. The message spreading behind the scenes became simple: the reputation risk might not be worth it. By the time photos of the emerald green gown started circulating among insiders, the conversation had already shifted. The situation was no longer just a wardrobe mix-up. It had turned into a cautionary example of why luxury fashion houses protect their processes so fiercely. The fashion world may look glamorous on the outside, but behind the scenes, it runs on trust. When that trust breaks, even once, the ripple can travel far beyond the original incident. Opportunities disappear, partnerships fade, and perceptions change for years. From that point forward, insiders say Meghan's name became something of a no-go topic in certain private fashion circles. Designers reportedly declined loan requests. Stylists hesitated to include her in major fashion editorials. Invitations to exclusive couture events slowly stopped appearing, and the public never saw any of this happening. To the average fan, nothing looked unusual, but inside the fashion industry, consequences can move quietly and relentlessly. The emerald green gown ended up representing something bigger than a single wardrobe problem. For many houses, it became proof that protecting their reputation had to come first. Once that belief took hold, brands like Dior reportedly made quiet but firm decisions about future collaborations. In this industry, repeated problems make negotiations extremely difficult. Trust, once lost, is one of the hardest things to rebuild. There were no dramatic announcements or press conferences, just silent decisions made behind showroom doors. Stylists who had once suggested Meghan for campaigns reportedly stopped pitching her name. Brands that usually send lookbooks to celebrities simply removed her from distribution lists. Emails that once came automatically suddenly stopped appearing. No official message was needed. The industry understood the signal clearly. Working with Meghan had become a risk many brands preferred to avoid. Some fashion houses even began adjusting their loan contracts across the board. New clauses appeared requiring refundable deposits, stricter documentation, and assistants assigned solely to track each borrowed item. These rules weren't aimed at one person publicly, but insiders say certain past situations had pushed brands to tighten their systems. In some cases, loan requests connected to Meghan were reportedly declined immediately because earlier pieces had gone missing or taken too long to return. Behind every polite rejection was the same quiet: this may not be worth the trouble. In fashion, fame alone doesn't guarantee access. Designers protect their archives the way museums guard priceless artwork. Each couture piece represents months of craftsmanship and decades of brand reputation. Once that trust cracks, rebuilding it can take years, sometimes longer. Stylists in private group chats reportedly became very direct with each other. If you want the piece returned, don't send it to her. One luxury brand executive summed up the situation even more bluntly during a private discussion: drama follows her wardrobe. Even companies trying to stay neutral reportedly chose to keep their distance, avoiding any chance of being pulled into controversy. The safest strategy was simply stepping back quietly. At one point, insiders say Dior conducted an internal industry background check regarding Meghan, something the brand rarely does. When luxury houses consider major partnerships, they sometimes review feedback from stylists, editors, and fashion representatives across the network. According to those familiar with the process, the feedback Dior received was overwhelmingly cautious. In couture, reliability is everything. If lenders feel nervous about where their pieces might end up, doors close quickly. By this stage, Meghan wasn't just dealing with scattered rumors. She was facing what insiders describe as a full industry freeze-out. And surprisingly, some of those concerns reportedly started years before her royal spotlight. Long before global headlines followed her every move, wardrobe teams working on the television show Suits had already noticed small but troubling patterns. The costume department on that set handled expensive pieces daily. Designer heels, tailored blazers, luxury dresses, every item carefully cataloged and tracked after filming. But according to insiders, whenever Meghan filmed scenes involving high-value wardrobe pieces, those were the items the team sometimes had the hardest time tracking afterward. After filming wrapped on certain Suits episodes, assistants reportedly searched everywhere for wardrobe pieces that were supposed to be returned. Storage trailers were checked, dry cleaning logs were reviewed, garment Garment racks were combed through again and again, yet some items simply weren't there anymore. At first, everyone assumed it was just normal production chaos. Human error happens constantly on busy sets, but insiders say the same situation kept repeating, and strangely, the missing pieces often involved outfits worn by Meghan. Even after the show ended, the pattern reportedly didn't fade away. During some of her early royal appearances, sharp-eyed crew members claimed they spotted familiar accessories and shoes. According to them, a few items looked exactly like pieces that had previously been logged as missing during the suit's production years. Some people brushed it off as coincidence. After all, similar fashion pieces exist everywhere. But others quietly wondered how wardrobe from a television set could suddenly appear at heavily photographed public events unless it had somehow been kept. When the issue came up in private conversations, insiders claim Meghan defended herself with a specific explanation. She reportedly said she didn't want clothing she had worn on screen to be resold or used in ways that could confuse her public image. But wardrobe staff had a straightforward response to that reasoning. If the concern was about where the items might go, the easiest solution would have been purchasing them directly from the production wardrobe department. According to insiders, that's where the situation became awkward. Purchase receipts never appeared, and the same questions continued popping up behind the scenes. In the entertainment world, though, confronting a rising star can be extremely risky. Careers depend on relationships, reputations, and access. Many crew members reportedly chose to stay quiet rather than risk professional fallout. By the time Meghan entered the royal spotlight, some insiders say the groundwork for a fashion industry freeze-out had already been forming. Designers and stylists were paying attention, quietly noting incidents and deciding whether the risk of collaboration was worth it. Once she stepped fully into the global spotlight, the scrutiny only intensified. The fashion world wasn't just hearing whispers anymore. People were watching carefully, documenting details, and slowly closing doors without making a public scene. Designers who might once have competed to dress her reportedly began taking a step back. Requests for wardrobe pieces were reviewed more carefully. Instead of seeing a high-profile celebrity opportunity, some brands started seeing potential complications. The shift didn't happen overnight. It developed slowly over years, but eventually luxury houses began treating Meghan the way they would treat any client considered high risk. Wardrobe, loans became rare, approvals took longer. Every borrowed item came with detailed conditions that made collaboration difficult. Stylists reported that some houses required extra assistants specifically assigned to track each item she borrowed. Others introduced refundable deposits, something usually reserved for unusual situations rather than major celebrities. There were also strict written agreements stating that every item had to be returned immediately after the event or photo shoot. Any deviation from that timeline could result in a permanent blacklist. For fashion houses, the issue wasn't fame or media attention. It wasn't about headlines or social media followers. In couture, the only currency that truly matters is trust. Designers invest enormous time and craftsmanship into their creations. Many pieces are fragile, extremely expensive, and sometimes completely one of a kind. When that level of work is involved, reliability becomes everything. According to insiders, repeated situations involving delayed returns, missing accessories, and wardrobe confusion eventually created the perfect storm around Meghan's reputation in fashion circles. The fashion community itself is surprisingly small. Stylists, editors, designers, and showroom managers communicate constantly. Experiences get shared quietly, and patterns become known quickly. One stylist explained the dynamic in simple terms. Once a pattern forms, it spreads fast. You don't need a scandal. Reputation travels silently, and that silent reputation can shape decisions across the entire industry. Eventually, the whispers started turning into firm choices. Many insiders reportedly reached the same conclusion behind closed doors. Working with Meghan simply wasn't worth the risk. Even fashion houses that tried to remain neutral slowly stepped back. Invitations to private fittings stopped appearing. Exclusive launches, couture previews, and major campaign opportunities quietly disappeared from her orbit. These are the perks most high-profile celebrities receive automatically, but insiders say those opportunities became harder and harder for Meghan to access. The response wasn't loud or dramatic. Instead, it was quiet and systematic, almost surgical in how carefully it spread through the industry. And it didn't involve just one brand. Multiple luxury labels reportedly made internal notes advising staff to be cautious about lending pieces connected to Meghan. Wardrobe departments became stricter, checking contracts, signatures, and return return schedules more carefully than ever. Stylists sometimes had to plan entire shoots differently just to avoid the possibility of another missing item situation. At a certain point, the industry message became clear. If a celebrity appears unpredictable, no amount of fame can outweigh the risk to a luxury brand's reputation. Sources say that by this stage, Meghan's access to top-tier couture had shrunk dramatically. Pieces that would normally be offered freely to stars of her level were now loaned only with intense scrutiny or rejected completely. Fashion insiders insist the shift wasn't about punishment, it was about protection. Protecting valuable archives, protecting brand reputation, and protecting professional relationships built over decades. Even the smallest details began receiving attention. Stylists monitored the events she attended, comparing accessories and shoes with previous wardrobe records. If something looked familiar or raised questions, it was quietly noted and shared among trusted contacts inside the fashion network. By the time industry insiders finished comparing notes and reviewing past incidents, the overall conclusion inside fashion circles was blunt. Reliability is everything in this business, and once that trust cracks, people stop assuming it will ever return. Despite that growing reputation, Meghan reportedly kept pushing for high-profile collaborations with major brands, but response she received had changed dramatically. Where she might once have heard an enthusiastic yes, the answers slowly shifted to cautious maybes, delayed replies, or complete silence. It was a sharp reversal from her earlier Hollywood years, when brands were eager to dress her and excited to benefit from her public visibility. Back then, fashion houses saw opportunity. Now many insiders say they saw potential complications instead. The shift also affected the stylists, agents, and publicists who had previously worked with her. Many of them reportedly started approaching projects more carefully. Contracts became stricter. Loan agreements became detailed. Everyone involved wanted protection from possible problems that could create professional fallout. What began as quiet concern turned into a full lesson in risk management. In luxury fashion, a celebrity's popularity can attract attention, but it cannot outweigh the safety of the brand itself. Eventually, the industry delivered its verdict, not through headlines or dramatic statements, but through silence. Trust matters more than status, and when repeated concerns about reliability appear, even global fame or royal titles cannot override decades of professional standards. For Meghan, that meant some of the most prestigious fashion houses quietly closing their doors. In the rare cases where collaborations were still considered, insiders say the conditions became extremely strict and carefully monitored. Fashion professionals often describe situations like this as a case study in industry protocol. Celebrities are not just faces wearing clothing, they are partners responsible for protecting the craftsmanship they borrow. When that partnership breaks down, the consequences tend to be fast, quiet, and absolute. And when Meghan's life shifted from television actress to duchess, the wardrobe expectations became even more serious. Royal fashion isn't just about style or publicity, it operates within traditions, protocol, and strict accountability. Every outfit worn by a royal carries meaning. Borrowed pieces must be documented. Gifts must be reported. Personal use of designer relationships for private advantage is heavily restricted. Catherine, Princess of Wales, reportedly followed those rules very carefully, but insiders claim Meghan approached fashion with a mindset closer to Hollywood celebrity culture, where brands often provide clothing expecting publicity in return rather than strict returns. That difference in approach reportedly created immediate tension with palace staff. According to insiders, aides were surprised by the number of clothing requests coming through and the extremely high value of some of the pieces selected. Wardrobe spending reportedly rose quickly, which eventually caught the attention of Prince Charles, who was responsible for funding certain royal expenses at the time. He reportedly requested detailed briefings explaining why Meghan's fashion costs were significantly higher than Catherine's. At the same time, some designers were quietly contacting palace staff asking about the status of gowns that had been loaned for appearances. Those messages created uncomfortable administrative headaches behind the scenes. Palace aides reportedly held private meetings to reinforce the royal wardrobe rules. The system relies on clear documentation, transparency, and careful accountability for every item worn publicly. But insiders say Meghan interpreted those reminders differently, feeling she was being unfairly restricted or singled out within the royal structure. What might have started as a fashion industry irritation was now turning into a much larger institutional problem. The issue was no longer just about clothes, it was about protocol, reputation, and the royal family's relationship with major luxury houses. When designers begin raising concerns, those concerns can quickly grow into diplomatic or reputational issues for an institution. Like the monarchy, luxury brands carry enormous cultural influence, and maintaining positive relationships with them matters more than many people realize. Fashion houses such as Dior were reportedly watching the situation carefully from a distance. Executives and stylists followed the reports, the rumors, and the ongoing wardrobe discussions to see whether the situation would stabilize or continue escalating. According to insiders, Dior's eventual decision had little to do with personal feelings or jealousy. Instead, they looked at the full pattern: missing wardrobe pieces, the resurfaced emerald green gown, ongoing tension with designers, and the complicated palace wardrobe situation. Taken together, those elements painted a picture that made collaboration feel risky for a brand built on precision and reputation. Luxury houses cannot afford uncertainty when their creations are often worth enormous sums and represent decades of craftsmanship. From their perspective, reliability isn't optional, it's essential. Meghan may have wanted the prestige that comes with couture fashion, but couture also demands responsibility, professionalism, and trust. And in the fashion world, trust is the one currency that cannot simply be bought. Maybe those relationships will be repaired someday. Maybe the industry will soften its stance over time. Or maybe the distance between Meghan and certain fashion houses will remain exactly where it is. One thing is certain though, when Dior quietly closed that door, the signal echoed across the entire fashion world. It wasn't just a single refusal. It was a moment that many insiders saw as confirmation of a much larger industry shift. Stylists noticed, designers noticed, wardrobe teams noticed. The chain of events leading there stretched back through years of missing pieces, quiet warnings, awkward returns, and one unforgettable emerald green gown that suddenly resurfaced in photos. That story became a reminder of how opportunity, reputation, and trust are tightly connected in the luxury fashion world. Once that trust is questioned, the consequences can follow someone for years. And sometimes, even royalty cannot erase that trail. If you've been following this story and have thoughts about it, share them in the comments below. And if this deep dive changed the way you see the situation, make sure to subscribe for more breakdowns and behind-the-scenes stories from the world of celebrity and fashion.